Hi, everybody, and welcome to the ALC Changemakers podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Sconyers, and I'm so glad you're here. Today's conversation is one I've been looking really forward to. I'm joined by Cedar Landsman and Lucien Demaris, co-founders of Relational Uprising, a powerful initiative that supports mission-driven organizations in cultivating healthy, resilient, and deeply connected cultures through relational practices. Cedar and Lucien are facilitators, educators, and change makers who bring a unique approach to organizational development that's rooted in embodiment, collective care, and deep listening. Their work challenges the dominant culture of individualism and offers a transformative model for how we build power and connection together, especially in times of complexity and change. We first met back in 2019 through our mutual friend and colleague, Mark Fairfield, who you may remember from a previous episode. I had the privilege of attending one of Relational Uprising's workshops and immediately knew this was something special. Work that had depth, integrity, and relevance to everything we do at Abundance Leadership Consulting. In this episode, we're diving into what relational culture really means, why it matters for social change, and how it shows up in organizations trying to do values-based work. Whether you're new to these ideas or already steeped in movement building and systems change, this conversation will give you so much to think about and feel into. So let's get into it. Here's my conversation with Cedar Landsman and Lucien Demaris. All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the ALC Changemakers podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Sconyers, and today I want to welcome Cedar Landsman and Lucien Demaris. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm so happy to have you. So for listeners to know, Cedar and Lucien run Relational Uprising, and I want them to tell you all about what it is and the awesome work. I know them through our mutual contact, Mark Fairfield, and Mark has also been on the podcast. And so I think it was 2019, maybe, might have been 2019, that we really met in person, and I went through your workshops at that time, so really got to see firsthand the really important relational culture work that you do. So I want our listeners to hear all about it. So yeah, Cedar, Lucien, tell us about yourselves and a little bit about your leadership journey.
Great. Well, I'll start. Thank you so much for having us. So great to get to be part of this cool podcast project and just in this relationship these years now. So I'll just introduce myself and then Lucien can introduce himself. I am co-founder of Relational Uprising. My own background is in organizing and in social change work in organizations, big and small. My sort of study, my background in study and training is in social movement history, urban planning, food policy and food justice. I was deep in that world for a while, and I've worked in organizations as a leader and a facilitator for many years. I think what brought me to this work of relational culture and focusing on how we protect our relationships within communities working for social change together, I think is a passion, for understanding how change works. I study social movement history. I've, looked at and participated in change work from a variety of different sort of entry points and angles. And I think that both an interest in how that work happens and is successful, and also just a fortunate set of encounters and relationships, including with Mark, including with Lucien, has been, it has led me to really want to focus specifically on the relational aspect of change-making work. How do we tend to the relationships that we build? How do we understand that as not like either a positive or a negative byproduct of the work, but actually central to making change work successful and generative? And I have just found over these years that it is essential to meeting the challenges of our time, to tend to the relational aspect of change work. So that's a little bit about my own background and what leads me to this work in particular.
Awesome. Thanks, Cedar. Lucien.
Hi everybody. So I'm also like Cedar, co-founder and director of Relational Uprising. My background though is slightly different. I actually come from a deep background, 25 plus years in the world of shamanics and embodiment. I was interested in healing from an early age. I'm from Ecuador, and from coming through, I guess, exposure to the healing traditions and indigenous traditions of my country was really shaped by a shamanic understanding of healing, which I would say is a little different from just a wellness understanding. It has that sort of idea that in order for you to truly heal, there's something about your world beyond culture that also needs to be addressed. Came up migrating to the States and tried to find, the trail of that sort of interested in healing by studying acupuncture and studying allied health practices like the Feldenkrais method of somatic education. And I was a wellness practitioner in private practice for a number of years, doing some body work, doing some acupuncture. But I think that what happened to me is that I was missing that shamanic aspect, which, really became the leadership aspect of the somatic awareness and somatic development of my practice. And that became more interested and more urgent for me, particularly because, I was really affected by the context we're in and feeling like, we're in ecological collapse and so many things happen politically, economically, and justice-wise that the culture of wellness, the culture of this sort of like relentless pursuit, you could say, of glowing youth and perfect bodies and perfect health was actually antithetical to the very thing I have ended up in this career. So I got more and more disorganized by the culture of wellness and their disconnection from anything related to context and what I consider true embodiment. So I ended up in leadership and became really interested in particularly relational gestalt and how relational gestalt was protecting physical process as a relational phenomena rather than this individualistic and disconnected version that I had embedded in. And this happened through, the relationships that already have been mentioned, Mark Dronfield, and the way, we sort of coalesce through an entanglement of social activism, personal transformation, and relational understandings. And since that moment, I've been totally dedicated and passionate to want to make the somatic methodologies and the somatic pedagogies more part of personal transformation and leadership, and particularly leadership that is related to group and culture work. And that's what have brought me here, and that's why I'm here and very passionate to be doing this work. Because I do feel like it's a work that protects an aspect of embodiment that is dismissed in our culture, that the relational aspect of embodiment, that it feels so crucial actually for organizing us to be really present to how much we need to protect our ecology, how much we need to protect our communities if we really are taking resilience all the way to the bank.
Yeah. Well, I love this. Let's break some of this down, because I think what you both have laid out is actually quite complex. So for our listeners who, they don't really know anything about organizational development, you know what I mean? When it comes to relationships, like they know the relationships they have with whomever, like friends and family, maybe colleagues and coworkers, right? But there's a lot of layers to this too. Can you explain and really break it down for listeners, like what your methodology and approach is as relates to relationships and why it's important? I'll name this for listeners. When I went to the first workshop, I want to say that it was the bonding workshop. I think that's what it was called. It's a level 1 intro workshop to the work that you two do. It's great. And one of the first exercises was just a critique of our current set of systems. And I think what stood out to me, and I'll just name this as my interpretation from a Western culture perspective, living here in the US, a lot of our culture that we know it here is based on the individual. So an individual person's growth, right? What that individual does, that individual impact, but we don't think in terms of how individuals are actually interconnected. So can you just speak to that a little bit? Because I think this is something I found was just very unique about your approach, because there's so many people in the world that do organizational development. There's so many people in the world that do transformational work, but it feels more plug and play and individual focused. And what you're doing is so unique, and it's not that. So can you just speak to, the uniqueness of what you do?
Yeah.
Start first.
Me? Yeah, I could take a stab and then you could jump in. So the sort of unique lens we have, I would say, is that when we work, we sort of work in two kind of main capacities. One is we run those trainings like you went to, which are for leaders to come and kind of get the full download of our theory of change and our critique of the dominant culture of individualism and how we understand that it impacts us in ways we may not even be realizing. And then, so we have those trainings, and then we go into organizations. We get asked to come into organizations for a variety of reasons, either, because they just want a boost or some help or to strengthen their relationships, or because they are having a breakdown, like you said, or, need help. And in both of those situations, we are bringing a very particular lens that sort of de-emphasizes the individual skill of individual leaders, individual members of a community, and doesn't necessarily have this approach that the sum total of people's individual skills and capacities is what's going to create the possibility in the collective work. We actually say, no, you need collective capacity to hold a whole culture where relationships are cared for and protected, meaning we value each other's experience by listening deeply and caring about that. We use a storytelling methodology to do that with a listening and responding practice we call sharing resonance. That's one of our core practices. We then really ask groups to come together to assess their shared, to try to make apparent their shared, picture of what the conditions they're working under and what are the challenges in the relationships itself. So we kind of, maybe in an organization, for example, where you have different departments that supposedly make up one whole organization, but just take on different aspects of the work of that organization. But actually, those departments are working totally in silos and are not communicating. And then whenever they do need to collaborate, there's a conflict because they work very differently. And so they're not really acting as a whole organization, right? They're acting in different, separated, broken down ways. So that might be a place where we might say, we actually need to look at how are you relating to each other? What's your story? What are your narratives about each other? What's the experience you have when you try to encounter, that collaboration? So that isn't even just one-on-one relationship. That's like team-to-team relationship, right? And it makes sense when you describe it, but it actually is not usually part of the logic model we have because we have such an individualistic culture that we tend to focus much more on individual performance and individual leadership skill and less on how is this system, building its shared capacity to do this thing together. And that requires a focus on that in-between space, on the relationship itself. So it is a different approach, and it requires different tools, and sometimes it requires reorienting people to pay attention to what they typically kind of ignore or back burner or sort of put out of their minds. I tried to break it down like you asked a little bit, to like real concrete, but it is complex. I don't know if Lucien, maybe, did I capture you? Maybe you have more to say about it.
Yeah, no, you definitely did. I mean, one thing I will add is this idea or this understanding that I do see missing sometimes that are unconscious biases, that's popular. What do we do about them? How do we change our unconscious bias? But it's this deep understanding that if you really are serious about wanting to change the unconscious bias of an organization, of our community, of a team, or our own individual unconscious bias, you got to pay attention to, we say, the deepest structures and frames of language and behavior. We say deep because they're not easy to spot, they're not obvious. And because of that's the reason you could say that we pay so much attention to how we're going to have this experience and how are we going to communicate and narrate that experience that we're having. And like you were referring to, if we want to really like have an experience that is different from our habitual culture, it got to first be deconstructed. What is the frame that is setting us up, first of all? What is the frame that is, or the story, we like to say it, if you want to be more specific, the story that is making us suspicious of relation or felt experience or all those aspects of relationship that makes us more whole. So you got to deconstruct it and also add a new experience that creates an over of an impression in your system and your life and your awareness that gives you a shock that something else is possible. Also I will say, particularly for those that are in the most, cynical aspects of our culture that, have really given up in valuing relationship and just want to relate to relationships in a practical way or transactional way. This is needed. You kind of need to be reminded how important it is. So harnessing that experience as well as the deconstruction is very important. So the practices that Cedar was talking about are like geared to like making sure that, that occurs and there's something to cultivate that feels new and experiences as a new way of dealing with those unconscious biases.
Yeah, well, thank you both for naming that. I want to take the time just to break this down even more for listeners, right? Because I think for people who are new to the work, it may be hard to really understand like how this shows up. So I'll just name an ALC. We've worked alongside Cedar Landsman with some of our organizations. And I'm thinking of some of our like nonprofit clients, right? Where they are, because the work they do, which is social impact work in some kind of way, they have been motivated to figure out how to make their cultures better, the organizations, right? Because there's a direct impact. If their teams are healthy and thriving, then the members, the movement space they're in can also be better served, right? So there's an underlying motivation. And I name that because everything you all are describing, this isn't like a quick plug and play, like a whole model, right? This is actually deep work. For listeners, if you heard in a previous podcast with Mark Fairfield, I talked about at ALC, we have the swimming pool analogy where the work is like shallow, medium, and deep into the pool, right? So the shallow end of the pool is when you're really new to something, you're really new to organizational change. You have a problem, you don't know where to start. You just need some baseline, maybe language, terminology, a place to begin, we'll call it. That's what I call the shallow end of a pool. So there's some baseline practices and trainings that can help you in the very beginning just to start. There's a middle end of the pool for groups that you've been trying to work on your relationships internally. You've been trying to solve problems like people are leaving the team. We don't know why, particularly people with diverse backgrounds. We don't know what's up, right? So you've been trying these different models. You don't know quite what's good. If they've tried without success, maybe they're more theoretical, not terribly pragmatic for you, right? That's medium part of the pool. At ALC, that requires a deeper intervention. You probably need coaching, not just training, facilitate discussion, the deeper work. The deep end of the pool are for groups that have probably made multiple attempts. Harm has been caused. The problems are very complex. So you need a really well-tailored intervention. That intervention is going to take time, right? It's not going to be a quick fix model. So when I think of the you all do a relational uprising, it's not really the shallow end of the pool work. I mean, people could dip a toe and maybe take your bonding workshop to know what that's about. But like to really, really go deep with the relationships, that to me has always felt like more middle to deep into the pool. Like you really got to be all in. And as organizational leadership, be invested enough to say, it's well worth it for us to go here, to really examine our relationships with some depth. We're willing as organizational leadership to make the behavioral changes we need to make, to be open to the critique, you know what I mean? And to try something new on, because what you all teach people is, I would say, it's a muscle we have innately as humans, but it's not one we practice very much here, right? So you essentially, it's like, I tell people, it's like going to the gym. You don't start with a 70-pound weight. Like you stand up like 10 pounds, but you're building a relational muscle that maybe has atrophied, right? So that's how I've been interpreting your work. Does that seem like it fits? Like it's really meant to have depth and teeth, and the storytelling as a mechanism to do that, but it comes with really important inquiry that deals with people's suspicions and their appreciations. Like, I just want to name for people, that's how I've experienced your work over the years. It's got depth and it's got teeth, and it's a way to really dive in a way that might feel uncomfortable, but it's just so important if you are invested in really rebuilding the relationships in your organization's culture.
That's a great way of putting it. You definitely capture that, particularly that fundamental piece of being like a long-term commitment, like and the depth analogy as well. Because we like to say, it's a work that is aiming upstream, meaning we're talking about a campaign of prevention and promotion that, will have a long-lasting effect in the whole organization. And yes, it will require big commitment, and it will require the desire and the motivation to dive deep and to stay committed long. For sure. I don't know if Cedar wants to say more.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's real, meaningful work. It's not surface level kind of just, tinker with things and then it'll, hopefully fix the problem. It is like, get under the surface, explore what's really going on, understand how we're relating. And that requires particular conditions, especially if we're in one state of mind and action, in social change orgs, there's a lot of urgency because a lot of stuff is wrong and there's a lot of fast work happening, a lot of responsiveness. So sometimes, you have to kind of slow down to be able to do this more reflective and connective work. What I want to say, though, to not scare people off, and think that, it's such a high bar, I got to go all the way if I'm going to do this work, you do, but yes, it pays off over time, but also I think, and particularly over the years, have really honed this. It doesn't mean you have to, kind of go really deep into, the nitty gritty and unpacking things in a way that feels like it starts to drift from the real purpose of the relationship. In fact, we really focus in this work on how these relationships and what they need to function for are working and can work better, and need to, grow and share more understanding and mutuality. And it's very much relevant. I guess that's the point I'm trying to make. It's deeply relevant to the work. Sometimes people make that, and that's actually a bias we have sometimes, make that idea that diving into the relationships is somehow something you should only do when there's a problem in the relationship, or it's something that takes us away from the work itself. And actually, it's deeply relevant to work on how we come together around this shared thing we're passionate about. So yeah, I like to reassure people that yes, we're going in the deep end, but like the deep end of the purpose we're together. And this is work that's designed for mission-driven organizations. We haven't really, so that is a given usually. There's some shared passion and values that we are building on, and so
Yes.
yeah, I would say that.
Yeah, I think it's important, right? That this is the work that is really designated for mission-driven organization. And that can look different ways. I know you and I have worked together in nonprofit spaces, but I believe you all worked in higher ed, right? You've worked in other sectors, right? Can you speak to sectors you all have worked in?
Yeah, we definitely work in everything from like really grassroots social movement organizing spaces, like frontline organizing spaces, to big advocacy nonprofits, legal aid nonprofits, things like that. We have also worked in higher ed, and also, particularly in our past lives, in various iterations of this work, we've worked also in high schools, both with young people, high schoolers and college students. We've also done professional development and community building among teachers and educators. And we've done work on like campus culture on campuses. That is a really another really powerful context for this work to happen, is in learning and educational context. We also have worked with cooperatives, you could say like mission-driven small businesses like cooperative farms, and mostly in the farming and food justice space.
Yeah.
On workplace culture, relationships, sort of holding values within, working on provide, food security or, environmental stewardship, things like that. So we do this work in a real range of clients. We've done some work with faith-based communities that are socially engaged and faith-based organizing spaces. Yeah, we've done this work in a variety of contexts, wherever there's groups of humans that come together and care about what they're doing.
Yeah, that are mission-driven. I'm wondering if there any like wisdom that you want to impart or advice for people navigating now. So given that you work in social movement spaces, social justice spaces, mission-driven spaces, given all that's happening in the greater context, and I want to name for listeners too, I'm going to put things up. Like, this work isn't only just about relationships in the silo, it's interconnection. It's dealing with things like bias, right? So all these things that are part of the greater national conversation, right? We talk about the DEI backlash and the DEI. Actually, when we're talking about relationships, we're tending to all of these things. It's not a weird, funky puzzle piece. So I just want to name that. Right. If you care about healthy organizational systems, you need to tend to things like bias within that system. So what are some things you would tell people now who are an organization or a team and they're just trying to figure it out? Because it's just been a very challenging time, I think, for the social justice space and people who are involved in mission-driven work and social movements.
You want to take this one? You go.
The first thing that is kind of like a highlight for me feels like the realization of how much connection or the role of connection has in true inclusion. I do feel like, since we're witnessing the backlash to DEI work, and we're kind of like in the midst of noticing, how far those, efforts really end. It feels like a very important, sort of moment to reflect on, was there enough connection in the effort? Is there enough connection in what we're doing? And are we investing in connection as a step towards inclusion rather than trying to do inclusion by skipping that sort of step? Like the importance of understanding how our brain even works and how change happens and the deep structures of our system feels fundamental to like, okay, let's really, make room for just seeing connection as a very important thing that we need to have as a resource in our communities in order to do this powerful work that we need to do, which is much more complex and much harder. And it will have, a possible backlash and risk if we don't attend to this. Feels like a more fundamental piece for change. That would be one thing I'm thinking. Cedar, maybe.
I would say too, just in terms of leaders right now, we do a lot of training, coaching, and facilitation with leaders and groups of leaders that are working together. And I think one of the most fundamental things is like isolation is dangerous. Do not don't tolerate it, don't allow it, don't stand for it. Find support, find connection, sometimes particularly in organizations that have a kind of a functional hierarchy, a traditional, you have an executive director, you have a leader, and then it's a little bit shaped like this. Functionally, that works sometimes, in many instances. I'm not going to say it doesn't. It very much work, especially if we understand and can see isolation and the risks of isolation and really understand that we need support. No matter where we are in that structure, we need both the enriching perspective of other voices, and supports. And we also we need to understand that our individual leadership capacity in our frame is online to the extent that comes alive to the extent that we are well supported. And maybe folks relate to that. Like sometimes I feel really powerful and I have all my capacities and I'm I'm a great leader. And then other times it's weird. I just feel like I'm just a mess. And some of that is just because our leadership thrives when we're well supported. And, if we collapse that and think that's just all about our own individual cultivation, we may end up too isolated. And that can be certainly harmful to ourselves because isolation is not a resilient state. But also it will impact those we are leading, or if we're in an organization, those we're managing and those we're supporting. So find support.
Yeah. Well, I think that's one of the keys to the work that you do. And I know that's what drew me to wanting to collaborate and work with you all. Just for listeners to know, Lucien are adjuncts of the ALC team. So that we've been intentional about forging relationship and working together in this work, which is just so important. And I think this piece around support and what that means and what that looks like for people, especially for people who've never been adequately supported, some of that systemic and on purpose, right? But that's there. And also dealing with isolation, which you both have mentioned multiple times this podcast, right? There's so many articles talking about how different demographics right now in our society are isolated. I think COVID didn't help. We already had an isolation problem. And then you had a period of time where people were literally isolated in their homes or wherever they were. So it's even worse now. So this is the type of work that, as it's done and done in the ways that you all have designed, it's the authentic way to actually bring in inclusion and belonging and deconstructing biases and make a really healthy organizational ecosystem. So I just want to name that. We're right at the end of our time. Is there anything you want to name for our listeners and viewers? Are there any upcoming workshops or, any requests you have?
Well, you want to go, Lucien? I'll say we do have an upcoming workshop, but it has a prerequisite. We have an advanced in-person workshop coming in the fall. Anyone interested in our work, there's an interest list for an intro workshop on there. If you go to relationaluprising.org and look on our calendar, the residential that's coming up, you can link to sign up on the interest list for an intro workshop, and then you'll find out if an intro workshop gets scheduled. That's a great way to sort of enter. And we've got a lot brewing now in terms of programming. You'll also see on there a link to a convening we're doing for folks in leadership in organizations that's going to be specifically focused on progressive social justice organizations and some of the leadership and management challenges that are existing in that space. We're kind of co-hosting a convening around that in the fall as well. So those are some things. But we have ongoing programming that we announce regularly on our website every year. Lucien?
Maybe one thing to make explicit is for those that would like to, to be eligible for the advanced program, like you said, making it really explicit, you can sign into the list, because if there's enough interest, we might actually hold another interview right before the September presidential, if that's the case. Otherwise, they'll have to wait for next spring. So yes, if you're interested, sign up into the list, and we'll be offering another one this year.
Awesome. And those workshops were great. They're the ones I took in 2019. I learned so much as a practitioner. It was really great to go to, and it's for their listeners, it is an immersive experience. Like, you really are in community with people, and this in the residential experience. So I just named that if you really want to experience relational culture and what that is and what that's all about, then I would say get yourself on that wait list and apply. Well, it's been so great. Thank you so much for joining the podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. So great to spend time with you.
Awesome. And to our listeners, we have more brewing, so stay tuned to ALC Changemakers Podcast, now on Spotify. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today on the ALC Changemakers Podcast. If you found today's conversation inspiring or helpful, we'd love it if you'd subscribe, rate, and leave a review. It helps other changemakers like you find our show. At Abundance Leadership Consulting, we believe in building sustainable leadership in connected communities through justice, courage, and care. If you want to learn more about our work, access leadership resources, or connect with our community, head over to jennifersconyers.com. Until next time, keep leading with purpose, keep building relationships that matter, and keep creating change, one bold step at a time.